Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending from where you are joining us today. I'm Alan from ISWA, and I'm introducing you to today's masterclass on recycling in emerging economies, part 2, reuse, recycling, other forms of recovery in Asia, Africa, and Latin America. Thank you for connecting with us from all around the world. With over 400 registrants from 80 countries, we have a truly global audience. In a moment, we will introduce you to the speakers of these webinars. The presentations will be followed by a question and answer session, and all participants are encouraged to type questions in the questions window to your right. We will be choosing a few of these questions for the speakers to answer at the end. Before handing over to our speakers, I'd like to thank our sponsors, Veolia, the City of Rotterdam, Ecomondo, and Messe Munich. They are main sponsors, and we are grateful for their support. Thanks also go out to our Platinum members. Without the generosity of our sponsors and Platinum members, it will be hard to do what we do. For instance, bringing this webinar to you free of cost. We count on the support of our members. So if you are not yet a member, please take a moment to visit our membership page by visiting the link on the screen. Or you could also reach out to our membership manager, Mr. Daniel Purchase, by writing to him at dpurchase@iswa.org. We have flexible membership options with discounts for students, low-income countries, and online members. We also plan on doing member-only webinars in the future, so do join us for them. I would also like to take a brief moment to introduce ISWA here, as several of you joining today are not yet members. The International Solid Waste Association is a global, independent, and non-profit making association working in the public interest, and is the only worldwide association promoting comprehensive and professional waste management and the transition to a circular economy. We are open to individuals and organizations, members from the scientific community, public institutions, and public and private companies from all over the world working in the field of waste management or simply interested in waste management. ISWA is the only worldwide waste association that enables its members to network with professionals, companies, and institutional representatives. ISWA's mission is to promote and develop sustainable and professional waste management worldwide. We have members from over 100 countries. I'd like to now give the floor to Anne Scheinberg, who is going to introduce you to the speakers and take the lead from this moment. Thank you again for attending, and I hope you enjoyed today's webinar.
Thank you very much, Alan. That was indeed very quick and very succinct. Welcome to everybody. I'm very happy that you're joining us for the second masterclass on recycling and related Rs. My name is Anne Scheinberg. I've been working on recycling for virtually all of my working life, and that's a little bit more than 40 years. And at the moment, I work as a consultant, mostly on recycling in emerging economies, and that's why I wanted to share the work and the ideas of some of my favorite colleagues with you today. I'm going to ask each one of them to introduce themselves, so in the order that they will speak. So first comes Daniel, then Kwaku, then Victoria, and then Emily. So Daniel, please take it away.
Thanks for that, Anne. So yeah, my name is Daniel Hinchliffe, and I work in Germany near Frankfurt in the GIZ Global Advisory Project called Concepts for Sustainable Solid Waste Management and Circular Economy. This is a project which is supporting and financed by the Federal German Ministry of Economic Cooperation and Development. So short for that is BMZ. And yeah, in my day-to-day, I'm essentially developing concepts, publications, trainings, guidance, and supporting network development for practitioners and yeah, policymakers, decision makers on electronic waste management in low and middle income countries. Thank you.
Kwaku, please. Unmute yourself.
Hi everyone. Hi everyone. I'm Kwaku Oduro-Appiah, and I'm a lecturer at the University of Cape Coast in Ghana, and I've been working since 2008 as a lecturer, and recently, since 2015, been working also with the waste management municipality of Accra, and have been working most often with interest in recycling, especially with the informal sector of the economy, and most importantly, have been trying to look at how participation and inclusion of these informal waste sector can come to bear and improve the solid waste management system of Accra and other developing economies. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, I'd like to invite Victoria Rudín to introduce herself.
Hi, thank you, Anne. My name is Victoria Rudín, and I'm part of an NGO known as ACEPESA that we have been working on solid waste since 1992. We do research, capacity building, technical assistance with the informal sector, micro and small enterprises, municipalities, and CBOs. We are located in Costa Rica, but we have implemented projects in all the countries of Central America. And I wanted to thank you for the opportunity to present the experience of ACEHIRE. This is a producer responsibility organization. We undertook the systematization of their experience, and Pablo Hernandez is the executive director of the organization, is in the background. He couldn't present, but he can answer if you have some for him. Thank you.
Thank you, Victoria. And last but not least, Emily, our question moderator.
Hi, Anne. Thank you. As mentioned, my name is Emily Newton and I live in Melbourne, Australia. I have experience working in recycling in the private sector and also in the municipal governments and state governments. Currently, I'm working on infrastructure delivery programs through providing grants to private industry, and this includes electronic waste infrastructure as well. Thanks, Anne.
Great. So, good. We're going to go right into the presentations. Don't forget, please, to write your questions in the question bar. And we won't be answering all questions. We'll be answering some of them and combining some of them. And unusually for a webinar, after each of us speaks, we'll have a question period, and then we as a group will come back and have a short panel discussion about picking out some of the most interesting questions to have a little bit more of a discussion about. So if you ask really interesting questions, you get the prize of having them the focus of the panel discussion. Good. This is my short presentation. One of the things that I'm very interested in is developing a globally shared vocabulary and basic concepts about recycling, which surprisingly works quite differently in different parts of the world. I start with this slide. If you were at the other webinar, the first one, you will have seen it already. This is sort of a schematic of the institutional landscape of recycling. Here, it's a generally private sector landscape. It's very globalized, and the money is in the kilos that are being traded. So here, you have a little sort of hierarchy of institutions. You have the end user industries. You have processors who get mixed recyclables in and grind them and crush them and bale them so they're easy to ship. You have the smaller purchasers, either the fixed ones or the mobile ones. And in emerging economies, you also have quite a lot of people who are working as individuals or families in informal collection to get material from the waste system and push it up the value chain. Let's go to the next one. You can look at this later. Here are some of the concepts and vocabulary. On this side, you see on the left, this pink is what we call the service chain. It's for municipal waste service organizations. At ISWA, these are our core business members. And what they do is they collect the waste and bring it to a disposal facility, but they don't usually get paid by the kilos. They get paid for the clean, empty space that's left behind after they've taken away your waste or trash or garbage. What you'll notice here is that the further away it gets from the household, the less value this waste has. And this solid waste also came about in the 1800s, more or less in the form that we know it, as a result of urbanization. And here, the money is in the service, in the sweeping, in the clean, empty space, in the fact that after the solid waste industry has visited you, your clean and your dirt is with them. One of the things about these two landscapes or two spheres of influence, they don't touch each other in most emerging economies. They are kind of separate worlds. They don't understand each other. And when a recycler looks at a glass bottle, like a glass jar like this, they look at it completely different from when a solid waste collector looks at it. And so the business of recycling in 2020 is really about how these people these landscapes interact with each other. And here, this is the classic situation in most emerging economies. The service chain is over here doing its thing, collecting the waste and getting it to the disposal facility. The recycling industry is here taking everything green that they can. And each time it goes up, you have a transaction. Somebody sells something to somebody else. And in order to sell it, they have to make it a little purer or a little cleaner or a little more dense. And each time it goes up till the time it gets to the end user, it's a commodity. It's not waste anymore. And I sometimes say, nobody buys and sells waste. It's always about the material value that's left in the waste. And in most of your countries, you also have these people, the independent recyclers, who are taking the waste from over here and bringing it over here to the value chain. So they're creating a stream that preserves value and then valorizes it, gets it into the recycling. I made this one. This is a little bit of a preview of what Kwaku is going to talk about. This is how it looks specifically in Ghana or in the greater Accra metropolitan area. And there you have not only these informal recycling collectors, you also have a whole sector of informal waste collectors who are doing both functions. They're creating the empty space and bringing some stuff to disposal, but they're also taking the waste, taking the materials that have value in the waste and bringing it over here as recyclables. This is how it looks in the EU, where I live in the Netherlands. And I'm not going to go into this now, but you can see this landscape can get really, really complicated. And you have producer responsibility organizations. Victoria is going to talk about this in Costa Rica. And you have many forms of hybrid institutions and processing facilities and processes. And Daniel's going to talk about some of these. Then you also have organics collection. And so there's a lot of different ways that things can develop. And that's my presentation. I'm going to stop. Again, it's mostly to give an orientation and kind of a frame for understanding recycling in emerging economies. So thank you very much. And we're going to go right into Daniel.
Thanks very much, Anne. So I will continue. Great. So yeah, I've been asked to kind of just give some insights from the GIZ activities, which we're doing around the world on sustainable e-waste management, and how we kind of approach these. And the first thing is, well, why do we as GIZ, so an international sort of donor organization, why do we work on recycling, and why is this important? And the first thing is, well, there's actually 2 billion people around the world who don't have access to proper waste management services. And this causes all sorts of impacts locally, environmental, social and health impacts. If there's plastics blocking up the drains, this leads to flooding, and this then causes maybe local issues, and also illnesses like malaria can proliferate. And if you look at the graph on the right, you can actually see the forecasts to 2050 in Africa and a lot of low and middle income countries in Asia. The amount of waste that's being generated is going to more than double than what we have today. And it's already a huge challenge for a lot of municipalities. So this is something which is a huge issue and really needs to be focused on. And when you look at recycling itself, I mean, it becomes part of an integrated waste management approach, but we really support this this aspect, let's say, as a way to reduce environmental and climate impacts. It's contributing to a circular economy, which is very important. And if you actually look at all the stakeholders in the chain, you can create employment effects and really enhance local value creation if you focus on the recycling. And if all that works well, then of course you mitigate all of the environmental problems and health issues. And if we don't do something around our consumption and our resource use, and move towards a circular economy way of production, we won't actually be able to meet the SDG goals because, or the Sustainable Development Goals, because these are all basically reliant on avoiding pollution and changing the way we produce. But of course, waste management and recycling has a very important role to play in meeting those SDG goals. So my focus is on e-waste, and why is e-waste an issue? Well, we have a lot of technologies at the moment. Everyone's using digital technologies to take part in this webinar, and also the sustainable technologies we need in the future, like batteries or solar, they're all going to use electronics. And as a result, we are using more and more electronics in our daily lives. And in the last 5 years, the amount of e-waste being generated has increased by over 20%. And in 2019, the most recent e-waste global monitor has just come out. 53.6 million tons of e-waste were generated. And of this, less than 20% was actually going into formal recycling systems. And this is an issue because a lot of the rest is being treated informally in informal waste management situations. And on the right, you see informal dismantling followed by burning of cables using refrigerator foams to get those temperatures up. And this is really toxic. It's causing all sorts of dioxins and heavy metals to be released to the environment in the center of cities often. And this happens because e-waste contains a lot of valuable resources like copper or steel or aluminium and gold. And a lot of people are deriving their livelihood from getting these metals out, but the informal processes which are used are extremely hazardous. And this is something which we try to then work on to reduce the environmental impacts that result from this and also the health impacts. It also has a high climate relevance. So if you just look at refrigerants in old refrigerators, a study by ProClima from GIZ also found that yearly these emissions from waste refrigerants are as much as 441 coal power plants. So a huge potential here, actually. But to do this in a sustainable way, you actually need infrastructure, and this is why it's also happening like this. Much of the time, there's no infrastructure in place, and this costs a lot of money. And also running this infrastructure costs money. And if you're competing with an informal sector, it's very difficult to get this to work in the way you want. So if you are able to set up a sustainable management system, then you can have a win-win effect on many different fronts. So the German development cooperation priorities are to take a holistic approach. On the one hand, we need to establish regulations and standards. We need to support businesses to become more inclusive, but also apply international standards. There are, of course, some e-waste streams being exported, so we also see there's responsibility that needs to be kind of taken on to transfer knowledge and create awareness on this issue. And so that all of this works long term, you need to have sustainable financing in place. So what makes sense in this context? Well, you can't just copy and paste what's working in the EU, because this can't work in a local context where you have totally different stakeholder layout. And we always say, at least in our project, it's very important to engage with all the stakeholders in the value chain. In low and middle income countries, you have lower labor costs and very experienced informal collectors and dismantlers in some instances. And you can actually then use this to your advantage for manual dismantling. And this actually can get more value out of the e-waste than shredding or automated approaches like we have in Europe. But to engage with this sector, it takes a lot of effort. If you don't do it, then you run the risk of just setting up a parallel system where you don't get any e-waste, because they kind of control all of the access to this e-waste. And if you want to say, okay, it's illegal to do this now, then actually it's very difficult to control this, because you can burn cables anywhere. So it just goes more underground. So it's really important to engage. And at the same time, we try to set up, or it's important to set up these enabling framework conditions so that local businesses can thrive and start to be financed locally to do things in the right way. So just an example, we have a GIZ e-waste project in Ghana. Along the top, you see these three kind of main pillars, which we would do in a kind of a sustainable holistic approach. On the one side, there's the political framework, supporting the implementation of the legislation on e-waste management, then followed by supporting the private sector to develop their business models in a sustainable way. And a large component in Ghana is also how to enhance the capacities of these informal sector players so that they do it in an environmentally friendly way and stop causing so much damage. And this is all taking place in a multi-stakeholder dialogue and communication effort. So Anne already showed a bit the circular economy, or discussed it, and I think this is a different way to demonstrate this. In Europe, we ideally have a consumer giving his e-waste to the formal take-back system, and then it enters recycling, and this is all paid for by extended producer responsibility legislation. In low and middle income countries, we have a different situation where you have a very established informal collection system. They give it to informal recycling because they pay better, but then it's burned or dumped, and a lot of the resources are lost. And the question is, okay, well, how can we use the high efficiency of collection, which is much higher than it is in the EU, for instance, avoid the low efficiency and dangerous activities of informal recycling at the same time? And for this, we can look at interesting ways to incentivize informal collectors to work with formal take-back systems. And this is an area where we've been looking at the last years in GIZ. So in an extended producer responsibility system, you could envisage a situation where you have local informal sector collection associations or collectors liaising with a mediator, so an interface agency. This could be a producer responsibility organization or a civil society organization who builds up that trust and acts as a transparent party to kind of transfer those payments from the EPR system from producer onto paying these informal collectors for their services, and making sure that those e-waste streams go to a formal recycler who can deal with it in the correct way, and thereby sort of reducing or stopping this flow to the informal recycler. And at the moment, we also have a lot of opportunities to kind of enhance this using mobile money and digital payment methods. You can cut out some of the middlemen, reduce the risks of having cash transactions, and also start to track the mass flows of e-waste, which are being handled in this way. So this is now being implemented in a few cases. I mentioned that informal sector is much more competitive. If you're collecting e-waste as an informal collector, you can actually see here in blue the price that was offered in this is data from 2016 for some mobile phone boards. It's much higher than what you would get from the formal economy. And this is why it's so important to engage and offer a varying mix of incentives So this could be financial, but also non-financial incentives like trainings to cooperate together, just to overcome that price gap between formal and informal recycling sectors. If there's no legislation in place to kind of support that price gap, you can also take a voluntary approach with producers just to try and kickstart that recycling system and e-waste management to take place. So we did some research the last years, and I invite you to take a look at some of these studies. In India, particularly, we did a lot of pilots the last 10 years, and this is now being implemented to some extent under the new e-waste rules. But if you wanted to, look, we'd analyzed these partnerships from the past to see what works and what doesn't, and try to find some common approaches. And one of the main things is to really understand that local context, map out the informal sector, how they're working. You can use civil society organizations as an interface to mediate discussions and links to producers and PROs. This is all, of course, built very much upon trust. So you also need to identify and build that trust between different stakeholders in the system. And you can support this with a mix of different agreements, protocols, and incentives, be they financial or non-financial. But of course, all of this needs some flexibility, and over time, it needs to be evaluated and closely monitored. Due to time, I would invite you just to take a look at these studies where we go into this in a lot more detail. So another point where we're also working is really trying to empower experts in local contexts to also take on these issues and establish local e-waste management systems which are sustainable. Just an example of some of the capacity building we're doing. Last year, we took on, I think, 18 experts from across Africa, invited them to join us in South Africa, and went through the ISO Sustainable Recovery of Secondary Metals Recycling standard with them. Discussed how they can, and taught them and helped them establish their own training itineraries to go and conduct in their own countries afterwards, and kind of combined this with a local trade fair from EFAT and some audits. So we're trying to help establish networks across Africa where people can also exchange on their difficulties and solutions. And every time we do one of these kind of training workshops, we definitely try to make sure there's some kind of follow-up. And we also have a webinar series, which we did for e-waste businesses, which you're also welcome to have a look at on YouTube, going through some of the priorities and the issues there that are important when setting up an e-waste business. And lastly, to finish, I said before, it's important that we take on responsibility along the whole value chain globally. And the way we are approaching this now is over the last year, we set up a Prevent Waste Alliance, which is working together for a circular economy worldwide. Here, the idea is to bring in organizations from private sector, academia, civil society, and public sector. We exchange and develop new concepts, guidance, and implement pilot projects in partner countries. And this is on the topics of plastics, e-waste, and improving framework conditions more generally for waste management. So this is one way where we're being able to mobilize a lot more stakeholders to also tackle this problem and really enhance that global exchange and networking. So that's it from me. I hope I didn't go too much over time, and yeah, hand back to you, Anne.
Thank you very much. Very interesting presentation. I sometimes say GIZ is really the only bilateral donor working on waste management who really seems to understand recycling. Not that I always agree with what they do, but they are a very good one they have an enormous portfolio of very interesting work. So thank you very much, Daniel. Now we're going to hear from Kwaku Oduro-Appiah, and take it away.
Okay, thank you, Anne, and thank you for the members on the board. We want to discuss as part of the work also today, or the discussion today, something peculiar to some developing countries, especially also in sub-Saharan Africa. And I would want to use Accra.
Can you talk louder, Kwaku, and to your microphone, please? It's a little hard to hear you.
Is it improved, please?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. So we want to discuss something about inclusion and how it can help improve upon data collection in in developing countries. And we want to share some examples of Accra with you and how through inclusion and participation, especially with the informal sector, we have been able to improve the data collection in Accra. So what we did, or what we want to discuss here is, I think this is a familiar diagram, most of it about the problems and challenges of waste management in developing economies. What we want to dwell on is those highlighted in red today because of the subject matter. But most often, as Anne and others have noted, and most of you also are aware, we have a large group of people in the informal waste sector who are contributing to the system in a positive way, but are not mostly recognized. And then the formal systems are also not improving recycling. And if even they try, we know they use systems, especially from Europe and from North America, technologies which make it a little bit difficult. But the underlying issue here is that despite this and their mode of work and the fact that we don't recognize them, it has created a big reliable data gap. And therefore, it keeps on in a virtuous cycle of denying the professionals to be able to get reliable data for planning purposes. So this is what we try to address. And what we did was to try and use sort of participation and inclusion against the framework of the integrated sustainable waste management to try and see how we can bring all stakeholders together and then find what is working, what is not working well, and how can we improve both collection coverage and also recycling. So what we basically did was to discuss with the municipality and some other stakeholders, including the informal waste sector, both in the service and value chain, and bring them together and assess the system together and learn about its weakness and strength. And then we sort of come together to say, develop interventions in a participatory fashion to improve collection coverage, to improve recycling. Because as you already are aware, most of the recycling is done by this informal waste sector or the informal recyclers. So in Accra, what we did was, after that, as I told you, we used the integrated waste management, sustainable waste management concept, of which we most often might be aware and we can't maybe have time to dwell on. But basically, it is to find a way to improve both the physical aspects and the governance aspects of the solid waste together at a time. So what we did was that, as a result of using inclusion and using the participatory approach, now the total number of IWS actors, both in the service and value chains, is known. We are able also to know the amount of waste they collect and recycle. We've been able to develop flow diagrams to know even where the materials they recycle or they recover and also collect ends up, or the system it passes through. We've been able to estimate also the cost of the service and how much they save the municipalities, both in terms of operation costs and also in terms of the landfill void space that they save. So what we've done is to bring them together, include them in the system from the planning stage to the intervention development stage to the implementation stage with the municipality. And what we've been able to achieve with some of these diagrams, because of the lack of data, these were not in existence, but with working together with them, building trusts and understanding each other, we've been able to know the service chain in terms of the informal waste sector, what they really contribute in terms of what they collect. So all the colors we see in this diagram, for instance, is referring to what the informal sector is able to collect and fill the gaps as a result of failure of the formal sector, which have the franchise agreements to collect the waste. And if you can compare, you could see that almost they are equal in terms of collection. That is 1,313 tons a day by the informal collectors and 1,486. The average is 47% to 49%, which is almost equal. And then what we've been also been able to do, especially with the recycling sector and the waste pickers, is that through the painstaking efforts, we've been able to build or win their trust, and we've been able to work with them, and they, leading the process, also have been able to bring out data as to how much they are able to recover in terms of all the various components of the waste they are able to pick from the landfills, including also, as Anne said earlier, what the collectors, that is in terms of the waste collectors to the landfill site, also are able to recover. And together we've been able to develop a flow diagram, as you see, to be able to plan further. What we've been able to do also with these people or with this informal waste sector is that not only has recycling and recovery been improved, but if you look at this, when we started with them in 2015 or in 2016 when we analyzed the data, for example, collection coverage was 75%. If you go to recycling rate, it was 5%. With their inclusion, it has in over 3 years been improved. And in 2018, when we measured again, you could see that coverage has been 90% and recycling rate has moved to 18%. And basically, our measurement has been that it is only the contribution of the IWS, because actually when we analyzed, we saw that the contribution of the formal sector to collection and to recycling was going down, rather that of the informal sector is going up, which has shot up improvements in collection coverage, waste capture, and also in recycling rates. So what we've been able to achieve is that through the involvement, and this is a difficult process because you need to win the commitment of the municipality, of the mayors, of the chief executive.
Okay, I see that we have a, there he is, good. Kwaku seems to have lost connectivity. I'm going to read his slides until he comes back. And then hopefully he'll be able to rejoin us. In any case, what they have been able to achieve is kind of creating a virtuous circle, the development and inclusive and continuous solid waste. There we go. Kwaku, back over to you. I started to give you.
Okay. So what we've been able to do, as we said earlier, is to sort of use the inclusion and participatory measures to improve the reliable data generation, and we're still working with the informal sector. The collection coverage, as I told you, has improved. The recycling has improved. And now, as we work, we're looking at something that is very difficult, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, compared to Latin America, how to include them fully, because they are still at the margins. We would say they've moved to be recognized, and we've been able to work with them now, but still more work needs to be done if we could monitor them and provide support and integrate them better into the system. What we have been able to do is that because we didn't do this alone with the informal sector, we also work with the municipal staff. In the process, they have been equipped, they have savings in cost of the operations have been realized, and then there's now an improved service delivery and recycling. The municipality is better, and most importantly, with them, for those who are aware, Accra in particular just recently won the award, the Bloomberg Award for inclusiveness. That is to say, including the informal waste sector to improve. And what Accra really did was to, as part of this work, to take a census of all of them, improve them by recognizing them and embossing their tricycles to be identified, and through that, Accra is a little bit improving. What we want to end up with this is that if you want to do inclusiveness, of which we can discuss further and refer you to some of the publications out of such research, is that you need time, you need to win the trust, and you need to find support for the system, because working with the informal sector can be a little bit difficult than expected, because they already have the fear and doubt that the formal sector wouldn't want to allow them. One key point before I finish is that when we do inclusiveness and participation well, and we are able to map and show the deficiencies of the formal sector towards recovery, towards recycling, towards collection, then we can be able to chat with them to say that let's involve the informal sector in the development of intervention or formulation of the interventions that will really modernize the system. This is what was done in Accra, and it has come to
Good. I see that Kwaku has just finished his part. There you are. Okay, I was. The internet connection in much of the emerging economies is not always very reliable. It's just about lunchtime there, so probably a lot of people are on their mobile phones. So this is Kwaku's last slide. He's asking, he's talking about how the field work goes. Kwaku, you want to finish quickly while you still have connectivity?
Yeah. What we want to end up with is that it is always better to look at closing these data gaps, which sort of is a big problem, by looking at what would work locally, and through the inclusion and participation, what we've been able to attain, which is of much importance to us, is that there's sort of agreement now between the formal sector and the informal waste sector that they can work together to improve the system. So thank you. This is what we've been able to do to improve the recycling and the collection coverage in Accra through participatory methods and inclusiveness. Thank you, Anne. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'd like to invite now Victoria to give her presentation, also knowing that Pablo Hernandez, who is the director of ASEGIRE, is in the background and will also be able to answer your questions. And Victoria will tell us, she's a little bit modest, but actually little Costa Rica had the first EPR system for e-waste in all of Latin America. And even I was with Victoria, I think it was in 2006, in a meeting in Brazil, and the people from Chile didn't believe it that Costa Rica was there before them with an e-waste system. So I'm very honored to be able to present this, to have Victoria present this to you.
Thank you, Anne. Okay, thank you, Anne. Yes, the last year, ASEGIRE celebrated 10 years of its constitution. It was the first producer responsibility organization for the sector that was created in Costa Rica, and as Anne said, possibly, I'm not sure, one of the first in Latin America. It was funded by 10 pioneering companies, both transnational and local. Because of the many angles that this topic has, I'm going to focus on the process. To provide some background, Costa Rica is in Central America. It's an isthmus that joins North and South America. And as you can see, it's a very, very small country. Only 5 million inhabitants. many of them living in urban areas. And our country has a strong focus on conservation, both terrestrial and marine. In 2003, it all started because the e-waste management was a problem, especially for large generators, both public and private, who had no option for its management. To address the problem, a project was presented to the cooperation agreement between Costa Rica and the Netherlands, and the project was coordinated by the Dutch organization Waste and ACEPESA. Some of the outputs we obtained were an assessment of the situation and of the key stakeholders, as well as a technical visit that we made to the Netherlands, which allowed us to start learning about the subject. Because in reality, we knew absolutely nothing about it, and only that we had a problem. Based on these inputs, a national intersectoral and interdisciplinary committee was formed with representatives of the public, private, academic, and civil society sectors. And we formulate a national strategy that included the formulation of a regulation that resulted in 2010 in a decree, which was the first regulation prepared for e-waste management in Latin America. And we decided that it would be better that it was a decree, it was easier, and it was under the umbrella of the integrated waste management that was also in that time in formulation. Currently, we're in the process of updating this decree to correct inconsistencies and discrepancies that emerge when applying the legislation in practice. Another thing was that from the beginning, we decided that the e-waste have to be managed according to the EPR principle, which was the tendency in Europe and in North America. But how was this to be applied in practice? How to find our own model or our models? So from the beginning, we worked with the sector involved, electronic importing companies, and the different chambers of the private sector, such as the Chamber of Industries of Commerce, the American Chamber of Commerce. We held many sessions on how to operate and manage the system, addressing the pros and the cons of each proposal. Like, for instance, it was better or not to establish an import tax. What was the role of the private sector and of the government? Whether to have a visible or invisible fee, whether to create collective or individual organizations of the private sector. So this, at the end, this in 2009 ended with the constitution of ACEPESA. I'm going to talk a lot more in the next presentation. The other thing is the waste processing sector, for its part, as the topic was with different sectors, began to be interested in the e-waste management. So in 2005, the first company started to receive e-waste for treatment. And finally, we developed many campaigns, information and awareness campaigns for the public and also for the private sector specific on the topic that till that moment was totally unknown. Once established as the HIRE, went through 3 phases. A learning phase. So despite the fact that from the beginning the producers and importers rely on a PRO as an operational administrative unit, for them it's still meant begin to understand what was electronic waste, how to treat it, how its market functions, also what services should they offer to their members, and what fees to charge, how to calculate these fees, and at the same time, always looking for sustainability of the system. This was a hard process. Since 2014, and there was a development phase that led to a consolidation phase. Some of the achievements are the number of members grew from 10 to 82. There was an increase in the volumes of e-waste taken back and recovered. Also achieving the stability in the financial aspect that has allowed them to differentiate rates according to the volume market by the associate companies. In addition, the management and operational cost of the system decreases, which also resulted in a decrease in the membership fee and in the e-waste treatment cost. With the approval of another more wide EPR decree in 2016, member companies request the ACEPESA board of directors to include other 8 types of waste in their management, such as used tires, lead acid batteries, air conditioners, used lubricating oils and its containers, scrap metals, among others. Currently, ACEPESA has a clearly defined process for management of the e-waste received by its members through take-back systems and deliver it to different authorized waste operators that guarantee safe treatment. Also, you can see in this slide some of the main services that ACEPESA offers to its members. In a very, very, very schematic way, and also Daniel and Kwaku talk about it, including other stakeholders that are in the field. The current management of e-waste in Costa Rica could be summarized as it follows. The consumers has the right to deliver their waste to a company shop without paying. The or the local concentrates it, and then a PRO, then I have to say that now, in addition to ACEPESA, there are other 21 PRO, some collective, and most of them individual. That means that some companies has their own PRO. And the PRO delivered the waste to the waste operators that disassemble the equipment and then send it to a local process, or most of them is exported. In this picture, the informal sector has no official participation. They mainly do the collection on streets with some small cars and etc. on main of the cities of Costa Rica. And the Ministry of Health, the entity in charge of the waste issue, is responsible for the supervision and enforcement in coordination with the municipalities. Although they have no responsibility for the management of this type of waste. There is also a multi-stakeholder platform called CEGIRE that has an this word is difficult, advisory advisory role in this in the topic. What are the main lessons learned of the process? Due to the characteristics of the e-waste, there must be regulation, and it's best implemented if the sector that is to be regulated is involved from the beginning in the formulation. There must be, this is important, not very easy, but that there must be willingness of the private sector to commit to an initiative of this type, even when it goes against short-term financial objectives. This is not easy, mainly because it involves a change of culture. And this is linked with the next lessons, that a key element was the integration of local companies with global companies, which already have social responsibility and sustainability values. Another thing is that it requires an intersectoral participation. So the search for solutions is attached to local reality. And with respect to the role of the government, it must have instruments that allows monitoring and control so the process can move forward efficiently, and there are balanced or fair market conditions for all the PROs. And for the functioning of the PRO is essential to establish an operation model to guarantee its financial sustainability. What are the main challenges? The establish of national recovery goals for the sector, because currently they are voluntary, and this is a problem. Strengthen the government's enforcement capacity, as well as the generation of official information, because we don't have it right now. Strengthen information campaigns for the population about their rights and the mechanism for the delivery of their waste, because many of them don't have the information right now. And linked to the above, to ensure that all the PROs have take-back systems installed throughout the country, not only in the central area. And a big challenge is how to integrate the informal waste collection sector into the formal systems, and also to promote the coordination between the different PROs. So, muchas gracias. Thank you. This is our information. And you have for the systematization that we undertook for ACEPESA, that is their experience. So, thank you.
Thank you very much, Victoria. Very interesting. And I'm going to invite now, there's Emily, she just came on stage. I'm going to invite all the rest of us to come back and show our pictures. And Emily's been kind of browsing all the questions that have been coming in. We're almost on time, so we're going to take about 12 minutes worth of questions that Emily's going to ask. And you'll ask them, and I will, you can ask them to who you think it's relevant to, but I might steer them in an unexpected way as well.
Fantastic. Well, thank you everyone for submitting your questions. What I've done is I've combined some of them. So I've got the first one for Daniel. So what are some of the practices that help build trust in informal, formal partnerships in extended producer responsibility schemes? And secondly, how do you engage and involve informal waste workers? And what are the impacts of unionizing informal waste workers?
So I'm actually going to say after Daniel, the other two presenters should chime in on that one. Go ahead, Daniel, please.
Yeah, thanks very much. So on trust, I think one of the main important things to do is to kind of, when you're setting out these incentives or pricing points, is to maybe to also have kind of stakeholder workshops with the informal sector, so you can kind of agree on transparent pricing mechanisms and establish that with them, so that everyone's on the same page. And I mean, one of the ways is to take to link up with civil society organizations which have already been engaging with those actors over a longer time period, because they often also have a link that, and the trust is there. So, I mean, this is one way to engage if you're kind of approaching from a different space, let's say. If you have a look at the STEP paper, which I also linked to in my presentation, there are some examples as well from Peru, where one of the PROs has also basically been able to cooperate very successfully with an association in Peru. And this was because they involved them in the legislative process very early on, so 10 years ago. And they've always been involved in that. So this trust was there, but they're also willing to do the right thing. And this was very important for them. But I'm sure Kwaku and our presenter, Victoria, have got more information on this from their view.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I would just say, for my part, I manage these kind of processes quite a lot, and I always say to English-speaking audiences, for talking to the informal sector, there's a 3-letter word that's the most important word for this process, and it's ask. Ask them what they want, ask them what they're doing, just ask, engage. Okay, Kwaku next. Are you there? Yes. Good. We're not hearing you, and you're not muted, so something's wrong with your microphone. We're still not hearing you. Let's go to Victoria, and Kwaku can come back when he gets his microphone working. Victoria?
Well, I think we have to learn from Kwaku and Daniel, because this is a very, very difficult topic. We work with the informal sector, but most on ordinary waste, as we call it, urban waste. But on e-waste is difficult, because most of this, in our case, they recover the e-waste from the streets. They pass through the streets calling for the people to give them their waste, their e-waste, and they're linked to some e-waste companies, treatment companies that buy the waste. So how to link with the rest of the process, with the rest of the system, is really an issue for us.
And you're on mute, sorry.
No. Emily, are you hearing me? Okay.
Yes.
And Kwaku has lost connectivity. Okay, let's park the question, and Emily, you can go on to the next one, and when Kwaku comes back, we'll give him a chance. You're muted now.
Sorry about that. So I've got a question for Victoria, but it's open to the other panel members, of course. Does ACEPESA's initiatives include repair and repurposing of broken electronics and discouraging the import and sale of cheaply made and easily broken products?
Victoria?
Sorry, I couldn't find the camera.
Yeah.
About repair and refurbishing. Was the question? Yeah, okay. Well, in our culture, I think all Latin America, most of the people has the custom to repair their equipment until it doesn't function anymore. So there's a lot of small shops that repair it by their own. This is a kind of business all over the country. For the refurbishing, there's no initiatives. We don't have any of them. There was a small initiative promoted by the government in a national institute, but it's too small right now. And I didn't hear the second part of the question, sorry.
So does ACEPESA do you work towards discouraging the import and sale of cheaply made and easily broken products? So working with producers in improving the quality of the product.
Yeah, sorry, I don't. But there's a lot of noise I can hear. Maybe Pablo can answer that also. But if you can repeat.
I can repeat it. There's a question about, the question is about how do you give some kind of acknowledgement to solid state equipment that lasts a long time, and that how do you manage the incentives of people to buy a repairable desktop computer instead of a non-repairable laptop? And how do your producers interact with this? And also, because this was one of the questions that the Costa Rican delegation asked about the Dutch system of producer responsibility.
Okay.
Hello, Victoria. Hello, everyone. I'm Pablo Hernandez, the Executive Director of ACEPESA. Just to quickly add to what Victoria has already exposed so beautifully. In Costa Rica, the second part of the question that you addressed about how do we discourage the import of cheaply made products? That is actually a very difficult thing to do in Costa Rica, since let's see, we do pride ourselves in being a democracy, and that has its caveats to it. And so we have to strike a balance between enacting regulation and letting a free market operate. So in that sense, we do go with some kind of awareness. We try to raise awareness in the consumers as to how bad for the environment and the public health it is to consume and dispose of cheaply made products. But it's more of education, more of awareness, rather than in actually enacting some type of regulation to discourage such practice. Regarding the first part of the question about refurbishing and repairing, as Victoria said, yes, there is a lot of repairing here as part of the culture. But in a matter of refurbishing, actually each company here has an individual strategy, and that's a marketing strategy. Many of the companies do not like to engage in refurbishing just because they don't want to compete with their own new products, and so they want those products managed in a different way. So they try to discourage that themselves if they can actually get a handle of it, of their own waste. So, but there are, as Victoria mentioned, very little initiatives in that regard, and some recycling companies do put that a program in practice, but it's very, very small. It's not significant at all.
Thank you, Pablo.
Good. Thank you. Let's go see if
You're
Kwaku
welcome.
can answer the question about how you engage the informal sector. And then I think we're going to close the question period and go into the panel discussion. And we'll pick up on this question, on these two questions and some other ones. So Emily, while Kwaku's answering, maybe you can think of one or two sort of combined questions to throw into the panel discussion.
Hello.
Go, Kwaku, please.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Great. In terms of engagement with the informal sector, I think within the presentation, I told you it takes time. It takes building trusts and building alliances. But first and foremost, I think the best option is the informal sector work to support the system. So first, I think it's important to form the cooperation and collaboration with the municipality first. When you have the municipality and you are able to convince them of the process of supporting the system with all forms of data, with improvements in coverage, of which you might not be able to promise. Gradually, you need to let the municipalities and IDAs come to the realization that they cannot do it alone. The formal sector is not also able to do it alone. So how can we use the informal system, which is already working, and gradually, if the understanding comes, you are able to win them. But most importantly, what we did in Accra was also that we start the process with all the stakeholders. And when you start with them over a year, over 1.5 years, now they win the trust because it's not you dictating to them, but they are also now aware that something being done involves them and is of their interest. And so you gradually bring them on board, and through the process of the planning every time and every now and then, you win their trust. And when you win their trust, they are now able to open up for you to also know what goes around them and also get reliable data. That is what I know.
Thank you. So now I'd like to invite everybody on stage to unmute themselves. And I'd like to kick off the panel discussion by asking about the baseline. When you are creating an intervention, when you have a project like Victoria's, when you are working with a city council like Kwaku's, when you are a donor financing, can you talk to the audience and talk to the issue of the importance of a baseline and how you build a baseline when some of your actors are informal, some of them are secretive, some of them are unwilling? How do you work on the baseline? Everybody can unmute themselves and just jump in, including Pablo.
Okay.
Well, okay.
Go first. Go first.
No, Kwaku, go first because your internet connection is working now.
Yeah, okay.
Great. I think I can always give the example of Accra. It is very important to develop or get enough time to do the convincing, especially in our parts here in Accra and in sub-Saharan Africa. It doesn't come easy, as you already and most of you also are aware. But what you need to do is to be clear on what you want to do and convince the municipality as to this is how we want to do it. It might go back and forth, but eventually, because of the viability and the potential of that system to work, you are able to buy through. But this doesn't come easy, as you say. It is a go forth and go back and forth thing. But eventually, when the municipality buys into the idea, because virtually they are the owners of the waste. And so when they buy into, then we are able together to bring all the others on board and we do it together. It might take time for others to join, but as and when they join, we need to go back and let them be part of what has happened and own them. That is what we did in Accra.
Okay, thank you. Victoria?
I agree with Kwaku. Participation of all the sectors is very important. So first is how you identify all the key stakeholders, but also how to, we say in Spanish, enamorarlos. I don't know how to say this in English.
Seduce them.
Yeah. So in a personal way, they get engaged in the topic and the search for solutions. I think that's a very important issue.
And can you talk about how you did this in Costa Rica in trying to figure out how much e-waste there was out there? How did you decide, how did you figure out where you were when you started?
Yeah, we make a research with the different stakeholders that we identified in that moment, and start asking them about their e-waste. But was really difficult because with what is the person, which is the person in charge in a company, for instance, of e-waste in that moment. Probably now is really difficult in the countries. So what we did is that we searched for official data of import of equipment, and we made how do you say suposiciones? I forgot the English.
Assumption.
Assumptions. Sorry. And we made assumptions. That was in that moment, because it was really nothing available of information. Now we are going to make a second research with this platform, Sehire. We have like a small committee of research. So we're going to update all the data. Probably it's easier now.
Okay. Thank you.
And may I add to that answer?
Yeah, yes, but I want to say something first.
Okay.
If you don't mind, Pablo, and then you.
But by all means, sorry to interrupt.
And that is that Victoria used a very important word, which is called assumption. But once you make an assumption, it's not enough, because you actually, in a participatory or inclusive process, you need to make a step where you validate the assumption. You go back to the small dealers or to the big companies and you say, we think there's this much. Did we get it right? Can you help us get it better? Because stakeholders will usually not come up with their own numbers, but they will really fast react to an assumption that they don't agree with. So this validation step is very important. Pablo?
Yes, what I wanted to add was precisely what you are addressing, is the fact that, yes, getting a baseline in business, coming from the business academic formation, we say that you can't manage what you can't measure. Okay, so that means, yeah, getting a baseline right is very, very important. So to know where we are coming from and to know where we are going, okay, it has been very difficult for us in Costa Rica to do so. As Victoria was saying, at first they had to make some really general assumptions, but we're still in the process as of today, and we are talking about what, almost 20 years later, maybe 15 or 17 years later, trying to figure out where we are at, how much consumption we have, how much disposal we have, how much responsible waste management we have, and that information getting to the health ministry, which is the ministry in charge of these issues here, of wage management in general, and getting some official numbers, still we take them with a grain of salt. I mean, it's truly, it has been a difficult process. We understand how important it is, but we are still not there yet. We are trying to get there, as Victoria was pointing out.
You're muted, Anne.
And we can hear you because you're muted. I'm sorry.
Oh, thank you. I'm actually not muted. So that's interesting. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. I'd like to ask Daniel about how this works in some of their consulting processes, which are financed by GIZ or related projects. How do you make sure you get a really good baseline?
I mean, it's a good question. It's often one of the questions we're asked by partner countries when we start or discussing on e-waste is, we need to have this inventory first before we can go forward. But often you see sometimes inventories are being made, but still this doesn't break the political deadlock. And I mean, in the Ghana situation, we had an intern who came and did a master's thesis with my colleagues there and was mapping all of the flows of e-waste going onto the Old Fadama scrapyard, and then going to each of the little scrapyard shops and asking them, how much do you have each day? And this was a very, very detailed assessment of the flows going in and out. But yeah, I mean, you can ask consultants to also go and try and do this, and often it's on a kind of interview basis. But yeah, I mean, in general, it's a difficult question. You have to go and talk to people, ask people. And I mean, even on this scrapyard there, every day you go there, you learn something completely new. And you didn't realize, okay, actually there's another fraction of different informal sector grouping, and they are doing this and this. And they're in conflict with this other group, and then you have to do a peace building process and so on. And I think that's one of the really important things there, is particularly if you want to work on these informal sector stakeholder chains. The first step is really to understand how are they set up. Do you have lots of individual workers, or do you have aggregator nodes which you can work with? Do you have to cooperate with every single individual, or can you work with an association or cooperative? Those are some of the questions that should be coming out of that. But yeah, we're also working on a global level. I mean, the e-waste global monitor, we're supporting this financially, and this is kind of just getting a first kind of estimation of how much is being generated on global markets. But of course, to go in on the country level, you need a much more detailed assessment, which yeah, I mean, PROs are in the best position to do that with the producers on their board, let's say.
Okay, thank you. I actually disagree big time with the fact that, not with asking the pros, but the pros also have some kind of interest. They are not neutral stakeholders. And so there you come to another participatory technique useful in the baseline, and that's triangulation. You not only have to validate your assumptions, you also have to kind of check from all different angles, because every stakeholder will tell their own version of the truth. That's what we all do. Okay.
Yes.
We have about 6 minutes left. I think I'd like to ask the question of each of you, what do you see as the future of recycling and moving towards a circular economy in your own countries? What is it going to look like in 15 years? And what do you have to do next year to start the process? Let's see. Victoria?
It's okay. What a difficult question, Anne. We are starting as country to work on the topic of circular economy. But we have the limitation in the case of e-waste that we don't produce the equipment, we import them. So that's really an issue for us. We're starting to do changes in other kind of products that it's easier. So I think what we have to move on is especially in enforcement to guarantee that all the equipment is really managed or treated in a safe way, that we are not sure is this going on in all the country. So this is really an issue for us. And the other thing that maybe this is a topic for discussion and another webinar is, for instance, we have like 22, we have 22 PROs. So that's a lot for a very small country. And we have like 36 facilities that are doing this ensemble of the equipment. So I think we have to work more on integration and control of what's happening in the field. That's the main thing. We have a lot of work to do.
Thank you. Kwaku, did you hear the question before you lost connectivity?
Yes, I did hear. Can you hear me now?
Yes, perfectly.
Great. And what we're doing is we still continue with the participatory and inclusive processes. That is to say, there is a lot to do when it comes to the processes of circular economy. So we're still at a place where, despite the advances we've made, we've not been fully able to incorporate or fully integrate them into the system. But what is clearer and what gives us much hope in the next 15 years is that the municipality, the decision makers, are buying into the idea of working together with both the formal and the informal systems. And the idea that if even we want to introduce separation at source, they're willing to involve both the service chain and the informal recyclers in participating in the collection of these separated wastes, which there's an ongoing project to that effect. So we are just of the hope that if we could intensify and continue with this process of participation and inclusiveness, we can together continue to formulate the interventions towards the circular economy. But as of now, we don't have a blueprint to say this is what will happen, but we are just optimistic because the last 5 years has been good with working together. That is what we can say.
Thank you very much. Daniel, 1 minute, and then I'll close it off because we have 2 minutes left.
Yeah, a big question, and I'm not sure for which country to answer this for. I mean,
try India.
India. Oh, I mean, this is also, yeah, again, a big challenge. And I think India or across the world, I mean, ideally, in 15 years' time, we would have financing systems in place which enable a sustainable recycling to take place. And ideally, this would be inclusive. And the steps that need to be in place is that we need somehow to have the engagement on the level, I think, that we're seeing with marine litter and plastics in the oceans. If this kind of engagement was there also for producers on electronics, maybe there would be some more commitment and more engagement to try to bring in finance to set up these management systems. And I think that's where I see the biggest need. And at the same time, a discussion on redesign so that we have longer living goods and longer living, easier to recycle goods and keep those resources going in a circle.
Thank you, Daniel. I'm going to close with a very short advertisement. In our working group at ISWA on recycling and waste minimization, we are co-hosting a project called Circular and Low Carbon Cities. And from that project, my answer to my own question is metrics, metrics, and metrics. We need ways to, facts-based ways to measure things like reuse, the effectiveness of EPR systems, lengthening of life, repairing. And so if you are interested in this, as well as the issue of recycling, please look at our calc project on the ISWA website. Emily and Pablo, thank you very much for joining. And of course, to our speakers, I'd like to say, let's give a virtual round of applause to Victoria and Daniel and Kwaku. Thank you very much. And we hope to continue this series with more masterclasses. Please give lots of feedback. Tell us what you didn't hear, what you want to know, and have a very good and safe afternoon, and stay healthy.
Thank you.